Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you see me?
I see an
Oh,
epic picture here.
oh,
All
there we go.
right. Oh man, that profile picture is something else. Was that you?
Yeah, that's me, Ray Donovan, looking all beat up.
Wow, nice. Yeah, cauliflower face.
Yeah, totally. Let me expand this window. Cool. Gallery view. There we go. Awesome.
Good to see you, man. How are you today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. I went into my office at the college for a few hours. I've been building an online class and am almost done with it. Thank goodness.
Nice.
So put a few
Hey,
hours in on that.
give me 2 seconds. I'm trying to figure out why this is not coming through my Bluetooth.
Okay.
Hold on. Which is weird because I have it set up for that. But then it was like, I got some pop-up that said, use computer audio. How do I change? Where's my settings on this shit?
Okay. There might be a little up arrow in the bottom left-hand corner where you can change the audio to like
Oh,
built it.
well, there's me. Let me see that. Headphones. Here we go. You are awesome. And say something.
Yep. Hello.
Oh, perfect.
All
There you go.
right. Good deal.
Yeah. Yeah, now we're on.
Man,
Cool, man.
I just had my AirPods in before we connected. I ordered a new computer for the podcast, and it came with a free pair of AirPods, which I love because I listen to so much audio just wherever I'm going exercising. So
Cool.
win.
I'm trying to block out. I have all this light coming in my office window. So
Yeah, all right, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It's an honor to sit down and talk some life and martial arts with you today.
yeah, man. I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be cool.
So, I just kind of been joking with my guests because it always comes up one way or another. But what are things like where you're at in terms of, the COVID regulations? You being a gym owner,
Right.
I know you guys. We are actually here in my state are getting clobbered right now.
Yeah.
Other states, I think 3 other states were placed a travel ban on my state today.
Yeah, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. We place travel bans on other states where they're all currently. It's kind of like flip from where we were earlier, right? When New York was like
Yeah.
the epicenter and people were putting travel restrictions on people from New York. So, but to your question, where are we? New York City being where it was, the epicenter of everything. So most of New York State is right now in like our phase 3 reopening. Not New York City yet. We're a phase behind because our numbers were so high that we were like the last district in the state that they allowed to start reopening. So we're in phase 2 right now in New York City, and so like a lot of places, gyms, our kinds of gyms don't really fit into a category, especially mine, which is very small. Like our average class size is like 10 people. It's like we're more like a boutique kind of place than a big, like even like I think when they outline the businesses for the different phases and they say gym or fitness center, they're thinking like Planet Fitness or, something with hundreds of people coming through, lots of machines, multiple classrooms, really fast turnover, stuff like that. So I operate from the standpoint that is not us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my position is that we fall under education. So gyms in New York City are not allowed to open yet officially, but trade schools and specialty schools and technical schools are. And that's how I'm positioning us. So we're doing a limited reopening starting in phase 2. And by limited, by, social distance classes and stuff like that, which for a gym of my size essentially equates to like semi-private lessons, because my mat space is only 30 by 20, right? We're really small. So our classes are going to be limited to 3 people plus the instructor, like 4 people in the room max, or private lessons, and so we've got the mat space divided into 3 8.5 by 15 foot sections, and each section has its own crash pads, its own medicine balls, its own everything, its own grappling dummies. And so we'll be running classes like that, and then we'll reassess as things go. But I'm glad to open at least that way, and I mean, look, I whatever. There are other gyms that I know are secretly open and training and rolling and doing their things, and I'm not that guy. So
how far away is Malta from you?
Malta? New York?
Yeah, Eddie Fivey. Where's he?
Oh yeah, he's yeah, no, I know Eddie. He's way upstate. Like he's up near Saratoga Springs, which is a good, I don't know, 5-hour drive, 6-hour drive upstate or something like that. And upstate New York was relatively, I don't want to say completely unaffected, but it wasn't like New York City, New York City. I mean, I understand the regional realities of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I wondered, because I had Tanner Rice on the podcast, and like their community had just not had a lot of cases to begin with, and hadn't had cases in a while when he reopened, and everybody's circumstance has been a little different, Man, I saw the amazing amount of online stuff. Like that's something anybody I've talked to that owns a gym. Was that something you were doing for your students or the community before this?
Well, I've always had one of the things that's helped me survive this, honestly, is my online presence, because I have a pretty big online presence. So I felt bad for a lot of the gym owners, maybe who are older or come from a generation that, or, like that old school mentality, like, I don't need that internet shit, or like whatever, or they're just, they just don't have the knowledge of how to use the internet or how to market or anything like that. So I feel like I was fortunate to have spent a long time developing a internet following and presence. So for me to create something new, like in this time, was relatively easy for me because I already have a following. But, for people who are starting from scratch, it was really hard. Like I felt from the beginning, well, as you know, I've had tons of free stuff online, like forever, right? Like I've never really charged, anything. I've put everything up on YouTube for free. I never had a streaming channel or anything like that. I've had a couple of seminars and instructionals that are pay-per-view, but generally, like, most of my stuff has always been free. I've always been a believer of just no secrets, sharing what you know, and just put it out there, And so when it came time for to shut down the gym, and I was thinking about ways to make money, I was like, well, now it's about time to start a streaming channel that people have to subscribe to, And I didn't really have to market it much because everybody knows who I am already, And I also wanted to provide something for the students that were still going to keep paying tuition, or even those that couldn't. About 50% of my students lost their jobs or whatever, and and I didn't want to do Zoom classes, which I essentially think are like a waste of time for adult classes.
Those are rough. Those are rough.
Pretty much every instructor I've talked to that has done Zoom classes for adults has been like, it's a big failure. I mean, I understand the intent, but I think there's other ways to what do you call it?
Engage.
Engage and achieve the same goals and stuff like that. So I wanted to give something to my students for free, obviously, to keep them engaged, but I didn't want to do Zoom classes, So what I did was start the streaming channel, and then I knew like a little ahead of time that we were going to shut down when we were going to shut down. We shut down a little before the state told us to.
We did too.
About 4 or 5 days. And then, but that gave us time to put about 30 lessons in the can, recorded a whole ton of them in advance. And then I had other stuff that I had recorded over the years that I never released, or that had not been released in a very long time, you know?
Yeah.
And then what I did was I set up the streaming channel. All the students get a VIP pass, so they don't have to pay for it. So it's free for students, but it's also available to anybody to subscribe to for $10 a month, right? So that actually serves as a bit of an income stream while the gym is closed. So that's helped a little bit. And so I've been, you know, it's been keeping my brain active at least. You know, I put up 3 videos a week, two that are exclusive to subscribers and students, and 1 that's free to everybody. So even if anybody doesn't want to subscribe, but they still want to check out the channel, we still put up 1 free piece of content every weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I was browsing around at just the stuff that you put out, and amazing.
Well, those, the more recent ones, I ran out of lessons, right? So I started thinking about other stuff to do. And like I started the coach sessions series, which I really am digging doing these, because I have like probably 20 years of matches recorded and on video that have, you know, like, so basically twice a week I'm putting up like detailed breakdowns of matches.
Awesome.
And my students love it, you know, and I do flashbacks, and I do current students and stuff. And it's really great. Like, just for me as a teacher, I still feel like I am teaching, you know. And then for the students who can't get in the mat, to get like detailed analysis of their matches and stuff and other people's matches is they're finding it really beneficial. So
yeah,
you know, but it's going well.
That's what I love about I've been putting videos out with the podcast for a couple years, with the gym for 3 years, I think. And it's just cool thinking of different ways to approach, like I'm going to do a voiceover with this one. I'm going to do a vlog or a series on this, man. It's that's what I like about the podcast too, is you can just get creative, and man, it's just a way to create. So
yeah. And each new thing you do, hopefully gives more ideas, you know, for other things to do. And so, you know, we'll keep all that going even after we reopen. I mean, the streaming channel is going to stay regardless of whether we're open or closed. It's just a new, like I wanted, my mind was, okay, I want to come out of this better than I went in. I want to come out of the pandemic closure better than I went in. And part of that is just, you have a massive opportunity to market your brand and to do really good brand building. You've got an entire audience who's glued to their screens right now. And so, and I'm not saying I haven't had rough days and depressing days, or I'm like, what the hell is my future going to, you know, be? But, you know, that's normal. But still, I try to be positive about it and think about how I can build the New York Combat Sambo brand during this time, so that when we do reopen, we're even stronger. Like, I literally have a waiting list right now, new people that want to join the gym, solely based on the content we've been putting out now. You know.
Have you been doing a lot of like digital private lessons?
Nope.
No.
No.
Okay.
I've had a couple of requests, and then I'm just like, nah, it's just not my thing, man. Like, if it was a current student that needed some help, I would do it. But I don't know. Like, private lessons for me are very tactile, engaging kind of experience, you know. And like, so for me, like, let's just say in normal life, I prefer, like, when I do a private lesson, to the person has to bring a partner, you know, and especially if they want to work throws and stuff, because I don't want to get thrown for like an hour by someone who doesn't know how to throw, maybe. So it's like, you always have to bring a partner. So aside from owning the fact that I'm like going to be 52 years old and don't want to get beat up all day, every day, you know, it's easier for me to assess how people are picking up the material if I can observe it and work with them with a partner with it. So it's to me, private lessons are a very hands-on experience, and like a digital Zoom type of thing, it's not anything I'm interested in, you know?
Yeah.
Now, what's different is, like, I have done stuff like that in the past with people like from other countries, for example, where they might ask me to break down a fight of theirs, or like I've actually helped someone in Thailand scout their next opponent, you know, for a Muay Thai fight from here, all doing it online and then doing that stuff online. Like that kind of stuff I'm totally glad to do. But when it comes down to like, you know, rolling up the sleeves, getting in there and working on technique, it's like, I just rather do it in person. And then I kind of feel like the breakdowns that I'm doing now for the channel are essentially like kind of the best form of private lesson that I could offer someone.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
know
so
that's a great point, because like I mean honestly, you do have so much stuff out there, like just even the moves from Rolled Up, right? Like
oh yeah,
I can
yeah, yeah.
just watch those and drill them. I have a huge TV up in my gym, like I could just get somebody there and do it. But yeah, that is a great point. Like Jordan Peterson, he's I've listened to him kind of say, he's like, yeah, but you know, I could lecture to a classroom, or I could just release this lecture online and it's consumed by an
Yeah,
insane amount of people. And that's
yeah, yeah.
how he thinks about things now, you know?
Yeah, it's always about when you're talking about marketing and content, it's not necessarily about the numbers of eyes on you, you know, or I mean, how do I describe it? Like the more eyes on your product, the better, with the hope that the right eyes will, you know, the larger your audience, the better chance the right people will view your stuff that can help you in your career, let's say, or the right people will see what you're putting out that need to see it for their development. You know what I mean? So I do agree. I think the more you put something out, and the more available it is to people, the better it is, you know?
Yeah. You know, so what brings us to this interesting thing. Like I knew you were into way more than Sambo just by following you over the years since I first saw you on Rolled Up. That was the first time that I'd heard of who you were.
Right.
And I had followed you since, but you actually have an amazing pre-gym owning Sambo background, like a bachelor's degree in advertising, graphic design, and
Yeah. That helps with the marketing too.
yeah, that I
Yeah.
was just thinking that. So, but man, you also I saw massage therapy, and then you also I was reading your abstract on your thesis. You have a master's in background in oncology, pediatric oncology,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I worked in peds oncology for almost 10 years, and then I retired that job to start my gym full time. You know, I left that job there. The last 2 years of my working at the medical center, I worked at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, for anybody listening that knows. So I worked in their pediatric department, mainly in oncology and hematology, oncology, intensive care, and once in a while, you know, the what do you call it, the ER, but that was more of like an on-call kind of thing. So aside from clinical responsibilities there, which was medical education, medical preparation for the kids, like supportive counseling for the kids and their siblings, and I was also faculty in the medical center, so I would work with residents, you know, on, let's say, bedside manner with children and how to work with children. And then I was also involved in a lot of different research stuff and published a lot. Like my whole scholarly life is like not known to most people like that just know me as a grappling guy, you know?
When I knew you had written some articles, but wow.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of publications out there. It kind of blew me away. And then too, so your thesis, your
Right.
research, what can you tell us about that? Like I was reading your abstract and I was like,
Right.
that is
So,
a very interesting topic.
so yeah, my master's thesis was on the use of imagery in oncology treatment, like mental imagery. And it was basically a review of the current, at the time, the current research, which now I'm so out of touch with whatever the current research is, because we're looking at like when I got my master's in like 98, you know, I did the master's on the long term. It took me like 5 years because I was working in a job and doing everything part-time, whatever. But yeah, I did my thesis on the use of imagery in pediatric oncology, and it was basically a giant literature review and kind of state of the science. And that could mean anything from simply using mental imagery as rehearsal, and then to the other end of the spectrum was like, how does mental imagery actually physiologically affect the body, and everything in between, like correlations with healing. So like I used imagery a lot when I was working at Maimonides, and you could call it visualization, you could call it meditation, you can call it whatever you want, but it's essentially the practice of working with a child and either using actual imagery or using art as a catalyst to generate the imagery to the term would be to positively recapitulate things, right? So basically like to rehearse things in a with more positive outcomes, like, so if a kid was like, here's a perfect example. There was a child that I was working with who had he was born with cancer. It's called Wilms tumor. It's a type of kidney cancer, and he was literally born with it. And he was one of the first kids I worked with, and until he died when he was 9 years old. And his mom was a junkie. There's a lot of issues there. Mom was not really in the picture. He was raised by the grandparents. But he at one point had lots of fluid in the lungs, pleural effusions for, his lungs. It's like kind of like a pneumonia or emphysema type thing, but lots and lots of fluid in the lungs. They had to drain it. They could not anesthetize him for the procedure because he had a massive tumor in his throat. So like, when you go under anesthesia, your breathing becomes shallower and stuff like that. And there was a risk that the tumor would actually collapse the windpipe if he was under. So he had to go through this whole procedure awake, which was essentially like jabbing a gigantic needle into his chest and sucking all this fluid out of his chest. So we spent a lot of time mentally rehearsing the whole thing before we ever went into the room with the doctors to do it. I would teach him breathing techniques, meditation techniques, and then we would spend time visualizing the whole procedure with the outcome that he wanted. You know what I mean? And then time came to do it. We go into the suite, and I'm sitting above his head while all this is going on and kind of coaching him through meditation while this thing is happening live, real time. So that's like an example of one type of use of imagery.
Yeah, wow.
And it kind of bringing all this stuff to my current life as a coach, like my whole prior life in education and psychology. And for those, my actual master's is in creative arts therapy. And then I did some postgraduate work too in bereavement and things like that. And then my official title at the medical center was child life specialist, but I did a lot more than like what a typical child life specialist might do because of my training and stuff. But that was my title that I was hired under. But anyway, I was going to say that all that wonderful stuff has influenced my ability to teach and coach athletes, just coming from a familiarity of working people under stressful conditions and helping with, understanding teaching methodology and learning methodology and stuff like that. It's just been really helpful with my guys and gals.
I can imagine. Yeah. Something else that I saw you writing about, and this may have been like a different publication, or you may have gone into it in your thesis, but would be basically also in children or younger people, religious and spiritual beliefs and how that plays into or is disregarded. I believe is the point you were making in what I was reading, which I thought was very interesting. And like, that seems to be, I did a special, like an independent study, special problems, they called it, with my philosophy professor. I have a a minor in philosophy
Mm-hmm.
from undergraduate. And that's something that an argument I kind of came into for people, basically the idea that's like, okay, what God creates cancer in children type of an argument that,
Right.
and it came up in this small paper I wrote for this ethics class. I remember that being an argument. And man, I've heard that over the years, but that is a fascinating topic. Like what would you say about that?
So, well, my personal beliefs are completely irrelevant. It's kind of like, I may personally think there's no such thing as God. And if there were, why are we experiencing all these horrible things, in the world? And why is there murder, and why are there wars, and why is there COVID? And but that's almost irrelevant, because my point was in that particular paper, and I'll send you a copy of it if you want to read it, but it was really about examining the role that children's beliefs play in their ability to embrace what's happening to them in a positive way. You know what I mean? Like, so it wasn't about, is there a God or isn't there a God? It was more about, what environment is this kid raised in, and what kind of beliefs what's this child's belief system, and how can it help make the medical experience better? You know what I mean? So that was the kind of stuff that I was doing. Like for example, like anybody who's ever worked with dying people will have stories. They'll have stories of stuff they've experienced that you can chalk up to being unexplainable, or could, you can't deny that you experienced it, but why? Like, so for a perfect, an example was like, there was this boy, Mikey, that I was working with. He was 5 years old, and leukemia, he was dying of leukemia. And if I recall correct, it was either leukemia or, I don't know, it was some kind of blood cancer, but I think it was leukemia. And ALL or AML, I don't know, it doesn't matter. The point is he was at the end of his life. He was essentially abandoned at the hospital by his mother, who had multiple children, multiple different fathers, and the hospital kind of just became babysitter for her. And so he's at the end of his life. He's actively dying. This is the time, and we're trying to get her to come to the hospital, and she would not come. And he's literally crying, calling her name, all this kind of stuff. So I'm sitting with him on the bed. It was myself, the social worker, and the nurse practitioner were in the room with him. And he's on the bed, and he's crying and sobbing and calling for her. It's a pretty tragic scene. He's literally vomiting like pieces of himself up, like his black, ugly, horrid stuff. And at one point, he stops. Everything just stops, and he looks into the corner of the room, like towards the ceiling, and just starts talking to it. And he's just now having a conversation with something that's there or not there. It doesn't matter. He literally just stops, and he looks up, and he's like, "I'm not ready to go yet." Like, he says that literally. He goes, "I'm not ready to go yet." And then he waits as if he's listening to somebody. And then he says, "Okay, I'll go if I can bring my yellow notebook with me." And then he listens again. And then he says, "Okay." And then he falls asleep and dies about 30 minutes later. So it was like, so to the point about spirituality, right? It's like, you could argue, you could go down the path of, was that a hallucination? Was that a spirit? Was that like, something that the brain kicks in to make the dying process easier? Was it God? Was it whatever? My point is, it doesn't really matter, right? It's the function of it is what matters. And the function was that it made the last moments of this kid's life more peaceful, right? Like, so I think it's a noble effort to try and figure out what that stuff is. And there are researchers there to do it out there somewhere. But like, for me, as someone like on the front lines in that moment, it's irrelevant to me whether it was God or whether it was, the body's way of making his dying process easier, like, who knows? So, and the same thing can happen with kids not in such traumatic situations. You know, like how they are raised to believe what they believe will affect how they embrace what's going on in you know, for good and for bad. I mean, we've had, like, let's say we had another kid who was a teenager who ended up also dying, who desperately needed blood transfusion, right? But his family was Jehovah's Witness, and the parents were refusing to allow that, you know. And there's no guarantee that it would have, you know, saved his life or anything, but, you know, so we've looked at a lot of religious and spiritual components that play out in the medical field, in the medical experience, from different perspectives, like ones that will help people cope and ones that make things difficult. I was part of a group there. Do you know what an OSCE is?
No.
An OSCE. So that's basically they do it in military. They do it in medicine. It stands for objective structured clinical exercise, right? So basically, that's where we hire actors and train them to play different types of patients, and we set up clinics, and the residents have to go through these clinics as if it was real, right? So I'm sure people, like, especially in martial arts, or people from police or military backgrounds, might have had to go through similar things where they're doing, you know, triage on actors, you know, that have been wounded in different ways and stuff like that. So what we were the first medical center ever to design what's called a cultural OSCE, which was to take situations, these cultural based situations, and design experiences for the residents to go through that are going to challenge their how they handle culturally different situations, you know, like like the Jehovah's Witness situation, or, for example, like maybe you know, there's a kid from the Orthodox Jewish community where we were in Borough Park, is very Orthodox Jewish community. So maybe there's a kid, and the parents he's diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, let's say, right? And we want the kid to wear a medic alert bracelet. And the family doesn't want him to wear a medic alert bracelet because any kind of indication of a problem with that kid might jeopardize a future marriage, for example, you know. So there's all these kinds of cultural things that came up that we had to train residents to negotiate with patients and their families, you know. And with the be all end all, that we cannot tell people what to do, right? So we have to negotiate carefully without appearing like we are making decisions for families, right? And so there's always going to be these situations that challenge clinicians when they come up against things that are contrary to their own personal beliefs, right? But we have to take our own personal beliefs out of it. You know? So it's challenging. So an interesting book to read would be, there was a journalist that was embedded in our medical center, and it's called Hospital. And Maimonides Medical Center is the most culturally diverse medical center in the country, right? So it's a really good book if you want to learn about what it's like to function in.
Who's the author?
I don't know off the top of my head. I could look it up while we're on here.
Yeah, that cool. Definitely let me know. I'm on a book reading and listening kick right now, big time. So
it's actually great.
I was actually going to ask you for a book recommendation. Yeah. So,
I mean, we had, like, here's an example that I talked about in one of those. I had written a paper with a couple of other therapists after 9/11 on like our experience as New York therapists, right, after 9/11. And like, so my father was a firefighter, and like I volunteered for the New York Burn Center doing groups with kids, children of firemen. And like, so all these, you know, these are kids that were, look, we all knew, the perfect example of how you have to take yourself out of the situation. We all knew that their parents were dead, right? But we could not talk like that. We had to always refer to the parents as still missing, you know, when the reality is that they were dead. I ran groups in the public schools in Brooklyn with some other, like our medical center volunteered, the staff to do things like this. And, you're running a group in a kind of a debriefing group to talk with kids in a local, junior high school, let's say, or even elementary school, where in the one group, you've got the same kids that beat up the Sikh kid in the schoolyard because he looks like an Arab, and they kicked the shit out of him out there because of all the stuff that was going on, the anti-Arab stuff after 9/11, and then now you've got them all sitting in the group and we have to talk about what's going on. And it was challenging times. I mean, we had a kid who was born in the States, parent of immigrant parents from Syria, but they were Syrian Jews, right? There's like minority Syrian Jews. They had immigrated to the United States. And I was in the art room doing a drawing with another child, and then the other kid, the Syrian Jewish kid came over and asked, "Oh, can I do a drawing too?" or whatever. And I was like, "Yeah, sure. How about draw a picture of your family doing something for me?" This is like an actual clinical test. It's called the Kinetic family drawing, right? So it's like you ask if you do it properly. I wasn't doing it as a proper test. I just gave him the idea, draw a picture of your family doing something. The actual test, there's a whole series of questions that you ask the child about the picture afterwards and stuff. But it was just like, I gave him the idea of something to draw. So he came back with a drawing, and this is in one of the papers that I published too. It's like, it's his family, the 5 people in a row, like his parents, his siblings. And then in front of them, now this is from like a 5-year-old kid, by the way, 5 or 6. Then on the ground in front of the family is a body. It looks like what we would call a tadpole figure body. Like they haven't gotten to the point yet of drawing humans in a differentiated way. Like child drawing development happens in a very specific pattern, and, it starts off with scribbling, then you get like the scribbles become circles, and then eventually those circles become like shapes that could identify a person. And so there's a body laying in front of the family with a bunch of dots all over it, like this, like freckles or something. And so I'm like, "Oh, tell me what's going on in the picture." "Oh, this is my family, and this is an Arab that my dad just killed to protect us." That was his description of the picture. Now, this is a kid who was born and raised in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? But it goes to show you like what he is experiencing at home, what's being said around him at home, and that stuff. Kids are sponges, man. Kids are not born hating other people. You know what I mean? Hate is a learned thing. It's not an inherent thing. And there's a perfect example. You can see it happening right there in that picture. Yeah. So like, these are all the kinds of things that cultural and familial aspects that when you're working with a kid in the medical field, you can't just pretend like there's no other context. Like a kid with cancer who was sexually abused before they got cancer is probably still being sexually abused after they got cancer. These are the kinds of things you don't even want to think about, but they're real. They're real factors. Or physically abused or whatever. Those things don't just stop because something else came into play. So, yeah, that was a long tangent, but that's all the kinds of cultural things and things that we would design in the OSCE. There's I was just a co-author on the OSCE paper. Like the psychologist designing it was Dr. Lisa Altschuler, and she's out of Maimonides.
So let me ask you this. So, I mean, sounds like possibly building your gym up while doing this at the same time. Did you just decide, okay, I'm going to go full time at my gym. Things are doing well. Did you get out of that life for a reason?
Yeah. Well, I don't know why I think I made the decision now is probably different than why I made the decision then. But at the time, I left the medical center in 2005 and I started the gym in 2003. right? So basically for 2 years, I was doing both. And like most new coaches, I didn't have my own gym. I was renting space from another gym and teaching there, building up students and XYZ.
Been
And
there.
then by the time 2005 came around, the gym was really growing. It was like, I kind of had to make a decision, if I want the gym to grow even more, I have to quit the job, I didn't hate the job. I loved my job, but it was just a matter of, well, if I'm going to do this, I have to do this. I have to leave this. If I'm going to keep doing this, then that's going to grow only as far as it's going to grow. So the reality is I was also feeling pretty burnt out, working at the medical center, and I was aware that I was feeling burnt out. And, what they say is if you're aware that you're burning out, you probably were burning out a lot longer than you were aware. Right. So, that was like, it was kind of a crazy year. It was like, there were particularly a lot of, deaths at the hospital of patients, like kind of important patients to me. And then also my father died that year, and there was like a whole lot of stuff. So I think I was primed to leave that world and try to make a go at just doing martial arts. Because martial arts I've been doing my whole life. It's like, it's not like that's whatever path I've taken in my life, martial arts has always been there. But so I think in 2005, the stress and stuff that I was going through working in the medical center hit a critical mass, and then maybe not entirely consciously aware of it, but it definitely influenced my decision to do the gym full time, which was a great decision. I mean, since 2005, I've been doing nothing but martial arts to make a living. It's been awesome,
Yeah, it is. Like, I joke with my wife now because, like, man, I was going to school to get my undergraduate and master's in history, and I had a little hernia repair, and I took like a semester off in there to just kind of recover. But I remember when it was a big push for me to be full-time at the gym, and then her to be full-time at the gym. And then I was like, but I'm trying to be full-time at the college.
Yeah.
And then it was a push to that. Now, like, it's just a big collection. The podcast too. It's like, that's the next big thing for me, honestly. And, but it's really just a culmination of all the stuff I got going on.
I can relate, man. It's like they say, if you want something done, you got to give it to the guy who's busy. It's like the guy who doesn't have time to do it. He'll get it done. The people who have nothing going on, they're not the ones that are going to get things done for you. So it's like, it's a double-edged sword, like you run yourself ragged. My wife is always saying to me, like, I'll maybe we'll do a successful event or a training camp or a tournament or something. And then, as soon as it's over, I'm already picking it apart. Like, what could have been better? Oh, that didn't go the way I liked it. Blah blah blah. Even though the event was a success, and my wife would be like, you could sit back and just enjoy the success for a minute. And I'm like, yeah, but I gotta be prepared for the next one, and we can't make this mistake again. But it's just a mentality. It's like a type A thing, and not everybody is suited to be self-employed, let's just say. It's you have to be a very particular kind of workhorse and glutton for punishment if you want to do this kind of stuff. So
well, and if what you're talking about, I don't know to what extent your wife is involved in helping you with all this, but my wife is a saint, and she makes this whole world go around for me, man. Like, all the stuff that I suck at, she makes happen, with the business, or, I mean, we balance things and we delegate and we have employees, but, man, she makes, me doing so many other things I'm passionate about in addition to martial arts possible. So, I really appreciate her.
Before my wife has her own job now, but in the beginning, like when she used to work, my wife used to work at CBGB's, and then she lost that job when they closed finally.
Wow.
She used to help book the bands and stuff.
Wow.
And then so she actually for many years was my photographer. So if you go back and look at all my old articles, and when they were print articles in Grappling Magazine and all these old magazines, most of the photos were taken by her. you know, and she would be at every event. She would travel with me to do seminars. She'd be the one taking pictures, like all that kind of stuff. That all kind of stopped when she got her new job and everything. But there was a bunch of years where she was like a big part of everything that was going on. And then even now, between running the gym and traveling to teach and doing all this, and now the stunt work over the last bunch of years, it's like she's extremely patient and able to live with the fact that my life is just all over the place and crazy and, you know, unpredictable, like when I'll be home or when I won't be home or like all that kind of stuff, you know.
Pre lockdown and everything, you did travel quite a bit. Have you still, like, I know that you had mentioned in the past, like you take pretty regular trips to Russia. Has that been something you've still been doing in recent years?
My last trip there was 2013. My first one was 2007. My last one was 2013. But that mainly was like at a certain point, I forget exactly when, I decided to dial back my traveling for seminars and stuff because I felt like my own gym was suffering because of it. And I kind of stopped traveling as much for that kind of stuff. I mean, I still, if I was a team coach for something, I would do that and everything. But by the time 2015 came around, I used to go to Russia like every 2 years, like that, Russia or Ukraine, or, you know, I was training with Igor Koronoy. So like wherever he was coaching, I would go there. And then I became the coach for the world team for combat wrestling. And though that was, I kind of just decided I can only do one big international trip a year. Like that's all I'm going to do. So once I started coaching the world team, I stopped going to Russia and then just focused on going to those places wherever we were competing each year. And then, which was like Hungary, Bulgaria, Japan. It was great. But yeah, I've been to Russia, Ukraine, and you know, former Soviet nations like a bunch of times. Like, yeah, a bunch. It's been great. I love going there. You know, I want to go. I definitely want to go back. It's just, you know, life gets busy, man.
Yeah. And man, I definitely, when I was competing a lot, when I was jiu-jitsu purple belt, brown belt, and I was traveling all over the country. Like, I mean, every surrounding state, California 3 times a year, Las Vegas, man. And I got kind of burned out doing it, but man, it just like, I felt like, it was just like, it was hard to have anything other than that competition culture going on at like when that's all I was doing. And then also I was gone a lot, and it was, it made the gym dynamic difficult to balance for sure.
Yep. It's that there's definitely a scale there of like, okay, I don't think it's essential to, like, for a coach to have competed, but I definitely think it's an outlier, you know, the good coaches that didn't compete ever. And I'm not talking about being a world champion or something, but I think it's extremely important for anybody who's going to end up coaching people to have competed. It does. I don't think it win or lose, or you have like me, for example, like I was never like a world-class competitor. I was always a 50-50 guy, like I win some, lose some, whatever. But I've competed in so many different things, you know, like from all my whole life, like Taekwondo and Kung Fu and Sambo and Shudo. You know, I fought Shudo, and then I had Sanshao fights, and I fought and competed in so many different things that it makes me a better coach, like, because I understand what it's like to be in there, you know. And, you know, so I think coaches who don't have that experience, they may have a technical understanding of things, but there's that key component of knowing what it's like to be under fire, you know, and to be able to function that way. So that's important. But the flip side of that is at a certain point, like in my opinion anyway, you have to decide which one you're going to be, competitor or a coach, you know, and which one's more important to you. And at a certain point, I think everybody that wants to coach will decide coaching. You know, I mean, there's certain, like certainly the old timers who still compete, but you know, those are not like maybe they're not as avid competitors. They'll step in there once in a while for fun and nostalgia and stuff. But I think it's really hard to focus on training for competition and also focus on training other people for competition, because it takes so much mental energy to train a team to compete, especially if you have a team of individuals and you don't have cookie cutter approach to competition. And so like you're focusing on, well, fighter A, this is his approach, and fighter B, this is his approach. And anybody who's ever been to a tournament where you've got like 8 guys on the mat and 1 coach, and you're running from mat to mat like a freaking wild man, like coaching across the mat, yelling to the other side of the room, like, you know, it's like crazy, dude. It's more stressful than competing, to be honest, you know?
Oh man. And yes, it is. You're all over the place. And then too, like I noticed this, like my wife has competed a lot. She's competed in kickboxing, MMA. And man, my blood pressure got so high in her last MMA fight. And I don't have like high blood pressure issues, but my face was red. Like I started noticing it when she started competing. She did these kickboxing tournaments, so they're like a weekend deal. And like I noticed, but then she started competing jiu-jitsu a lot, and my heart would just always be beating fast. But then it's like you're coaching kids, you're coaching adults, you're coaching white belts. It's just back and forth, man.
You're running around.
It's all day a lot of times too.
Yep. The last time I competed was 2014 or 15, and my wife was it's in a funny way, she kind of forced me to do it in a way. Like, so my guys were going to do a Sanxiao tournament, and so not Sanxiao, Shuaijiao tournament, right? So it's just throws, right? It's basically like judo or sambo, but it's only throws, you know, just like a lot of cultural wrestling styles. And it's with a jacket. So we were training in our team practice. Everybody was wearing their Shuaijiao jackets, and everybody's training for it. And I got a jacket for myself, and I'm training with the guys. And at the same time, I was going to be testing for my judo shodan, right? So I was in really good shape. So I was just training with them and getting ready for the test, the shodan test and everything. And I was like, maybe this is what I said. I said, maybe I went home and I told my wife, you know, I'm just going to bring my jacket to the tournament. And if they have an old man division or something, I might jump in there, like whatever, we'll see, you know? And then like the next day or something, she comes home and she's like, I took the day off from work. I'm going to come watch you compete, you know? And I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't say I was definitely going to do it, you know? So I was like, fuck it. Okay, I'm going to do it. So then I went to the tournament, and at that time I was 46 or 46. And the next oldest guy was 28, I think. So like there was no old man. So and plus it was like everybody over 180 pounds and everybody under 180 pounds. Those are the 2 divisions. So I weighed in with the you have to weigh in with the jacket on. So I weighed in 181. So I was like in that division, right? So my first guy that I had to go against was a 223 pound college wrestler kid. And we had just seen him completely blast double smash the guy like right before me, right? So I remember my wife whispers to me, like, do you have to go against that guy? And then I'm like, yeah, I got this. Don't worry about it. But inside I'm like, oh, fuck, man. Gotta go against this dude. But I did fine. I won, but it was you know, it was cool. So that was the last time I competed, is I won that tournament. And then at first, I think everybody was gathering around to watch, because they're like, who's this old, you know, like it was the Chinese martial art community. They don't know who I am or anything. So they were like, who's this old guy going to go in there with the young guys or whatever. So then I won the first match against that big dude. And then now I switched from like the dancing bear to like somebody that then like, oh, this guy's actually not a freak. He's actually got some skill or like whatever. And then as match went by, I think more people started watching, because it was just something, you know, like all these people were coming up to me, where do you study Shuaijiao? Where do you study Shuaijiao? I'm like, I don't, I do Sambo, you know, but it's throwing is throwing, wrestling is wrestling. So.
Well, and I've heard you make comments on that about, and like, and just how you kind of operate with at your school is that rule sets, you can kind of turn them on and off. You can do different tournaments. You can have students that do different rule sets at different tournaments. Especially, I didn't know you had a background in judo, but I have my shodan in judo. I got it maybe, when was that? It was the year Hickson got promoted to the red belt that he doesn't wear. Because I was at that seminar, and as soon as I got back, I tested for my shodan.
Cool.
But that was like the correlating link. And what was funny is he showed all this like obscure judo in these 2 seminars, and I was like, win.
Nice.
Like a bunch of defensive posture and stuff. It was really good stuff, actually. But that's man, I'm fascinated by what Sambo I've seen. I've studied more of the historical side of its origins and how, like, my thesis a little bit on differences in the reappropriation or reinvention of martial arts styles in either Eastern totalitarian societies or liberal democratic societies. And talked about China under Mao and Soviet Union. But do you have any good source recommendations for Sambo, for history? I mean, that was such a big issue when I was doing my thesis, was finding really good sources, primary sources, because, man, I don't speak Russian. And
if you don't read Russian, it's really tough, man. I mean, there's a book called Sambo from Spiridonov to Putin. It's out of print now, but it's written by David Rudman. It's not the most scholarly book, but it's probably the best history book in English. And it's essentially just a collection of profiles of people throughout the decades, noted practitioners throughout the decades. There's a couple of books in English that mention Sambo but are not focused on Sambo, and they're more history books. Like, so I'm really interested in like military history and stuff like that. So there's a couple of books that discuss Sambo sort of as a peripheral character, but not the main one. One is called, there's a defector who wrote a bunch of books. His pseudonym is Viktor Suvorov. I forget his real name. His real name is known, but at the time, and he wrote a couple of different books about KGB and Spetsnaz and how they do stuff. There's one that he wrote on Spetsnaz that my coach actually gave me a copy of it. He's like, read this. It's 100%. It's 100% on target. And so that's a good book. And then I forget off the top of my head, there's a book that I found. It's also out of print, but I found this old book called Commandos from the Sea. And it was published by Annapolis Press, and it was a reprint of an earlier, I think it was published in the 80s, but it was a reprint of a book from the 60s, a Soviet book, sort of. I wouldn't exactly call it a historical text. I think it's a bit more of a mix of history and mythology, but it is about the development of the naval Spetsnaz, and so there's a lot of books like that mention Sambo, but they're not Sambo books. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's hard to find. But I mean, there's definitely like if you just look at the evolution of the sport of Sambo, you could see it mirroring cultural zeitgeist that was like kind of happening around the world. Combat Sambo as a formal international sport didn't start till like 2000, right? Prior to that, Combat Sambo was just what it was to train fighting. You know what I mean? And there might have been some intramural type of things and stuff, but it became an actual adopted sport by FIAS in 2000. And then, but if you look at like Sambo Sambo basically being an amalgamation of all these useful techniques from other styles, right? Like that's kind of how they created it. That's early 20th century stuff. And then if you go back and then you look at like now you had this, like most martial arts, it starts as a purely combative thing, and then it evolves to having some kind of sport variant. Like that's pretty universal, you know. Like it starts off with, like, we're just going to teach you how to fight, and then at some point somebody realizes, well, we can't kill each other every time we train, so we've got to do X, Y, Z, and then all of a sudden you have a sport version, right? And then that sport version over time becomes more and more and more sportified until it's so distant from the original combat version that started it, it's like a completely different animal. So it's like, but if you look at like around the time that MMA, or even before MMA, like Shudo in Japan, like the late 80s, early 90s, you know, and that's the same time like Vale Tudo stuff was really taking off in Brazil, and the same time that combat sambo was starting to take off as a thing, and, you know, in Russia. I just feel like culturally, you know, worldwide, there was this zeitgeist of like, we're moving out of this single discipline world into back to more of a all-inclusive type of fight sport game, right? And it was all going on simultaneously without really, you know, nobody was like communicating about this, but for some reason, people over there all were having the same idea. Like we gotta have some kind of combat sport that is not just single discipline stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it'd be interesting to look historically what was going on in the different cultures that like led to that, you know, like what led to the growth of Vale Tudo, you know, and what led to the growth of MMA. Yeah. I mean, we know the hype of what led to it, but like what really led to it on a larger cultural level, and what led to the growth of combat sambo as a sport, as opposed to just a training thing, you know? Yeah, it's just interesting stuff, man.
It really is. Here's a question for you. So, and you may not have much of an opinion about it. I don't know, but yeah, in that same vein as stylization of sport, what do you think is something or factors that are keeping sambo from perhaps becoming or having previously become an Olympic sport, or becoming an Olympic sport in the future, or jiu-jitsu?
Different answers. I will say, well, okay, so jiu-jitsu, I think it's easy. Jiu-jitsu will, while the IBJJF is the main governing body, will never be an Olympic sport. It's impossible. Like that's a single owned corporation. All that money goes to one guy, and that is just not how national governing bodies work, and that's not what the IOC expects from a governing body. So if jiu-jitsu is ever going to be in the Olympics, they need to, which I don't think they will, because it's boring for spectators. It's boring for people who don't know what they're watching, you know. But aside from that, which is just my opinion, the fact is that the way sport version of jiu-jitsu is organized internationally, it's just not applicable to the way normal international sport is governed, right? So until that changes, it's never going to be in the Olympics, ever. Like they're going to have to come up with a new, transparent, yet possibly equally corrupt, but new, transparent, official, non-for-profit organization that serves as a governing body worldwide, you know. That has to happen. Now, Sambo does have that, you know what I mean? Sambo FIAS is a true, you know, NGB, international governing body, like the IJF. You know, the problem there is just corruption, you know, and also I just don't see Sambo adding anything to the Olympics. Like it's too similar to judo. I mean, if you think about it, the IOC was ready to give up wrestling, which is like insane, right? So they were ready to give up wrestling. They're not going to take another wrestling style back in. They're just not, you know. I think combat sambo is, honestly, I think combat sambo is Sambo's chance to get in the Olympics. But to the old timers that run the Sambo, that run FIAS, they still believe that sport version of combat sambo is like kind of like they're the bastard stepchild. They're definitely like the sport sambo snobs, you know, and a lot of them are judo snobs that don't like the way that judo went. So now they're doing they're fucking up sambo the same way they did judo. But combat sambo is definitely like a weird thing. It's like it's used to market the sport internationally big time, but behind closed doors, I've had people tell me, people in the organizing roles in FIAS tell me to my face that if they could, they would just get rid of combat sambo as a sport. It's just too brutal, not gentlemanly. It's like the same kind of shit that we were dealing with when MMA was banned. But that's their mentality. And so the irony is I think that combat sambo is the one unique thing that sambo can offer to the Olympics that no other sport in the Olympics offers. It's like an MMA style sport, but that won't happen.
Well,
I personally don't want sambo to be in the Olympics. I'm opposed because I think the Olympics neuters sports. They like combat sports, like it basically neuters them. Ask anybody from any combat sport about what it's been like whether it's fencing or taekwondo or boxing or wrestling or whatever. Ask them how the sport has changed since it's been an Olympic sport, and they will all tell you it's gotten weak.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's losing the combative nature. Like fencing has become glorified tag. Like fencing is essentially like NASCA point sparring karate, where I touch you once and then that's it. And it's like judo. Everybody is aware of the changes that have happened in judo, and ask anybody involved in boxing for more than 10 years, like how has Olympic boxing changed? They won't like it. And wrestling, I mean, nobody's happy with the long-term trajectory of how sports change once they're in the Olympics. Combat sports, they start to remove the combat part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that is an interesting trend. I mean, something I would definitely like. What got us on that is talking about stylization of sport, and I know that's constantly something that comes up when there's any debate on adding styles initially, whether it's in the 60s or now, with
I mean, yeah, to the people that want sambo in the Olympics, I mean, my honest question to them is why? Like, what do you get out of it? Because the only thing that comes out of it is financial. And for a lot of countries where they have national sport organizations that will fund, not like this country, of course, but like other countries where their Olympians are funded based on results, like the Olympics having sambo in it would definitely benefit countries that could produce Olympic champions, but that's not the case in the United States. Like, our Olympic champions still have to work at McDonald's sometimes. And so it's like, but I don't see getting into the Olympics as anything positive for the style itself. It's only positive for bank accounts of certain people. And so I don't really care if we get into the Olympics or not. I don't care about the bank account of some other country,
Yeah. So MMA in New York. I know that I've seen you before it was legalized. When was it legalized? How long has that been? 5 years? Even that long?
2016, I think. 2015, I think 2016.
So, just in us chatting back and forth for the podcast, you said you were on kind of a short list of people interviewed for the State Athletic Commission? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. There were a couple of us who were really active in lobbying back then that are also, not just me. There were a few of us that were interviewed for potential position on the commission. Yeah.
So what was that lobbying process like? I mean, how did that go?
It was like running a gym, man. It was just like a lot of work and you have to be passionate about it. Right. But, essentially it all started like, there used to be a thing here in New York called the MMA Expo, and it would take place at the Javits Center, right? A big convention center. And they would have like, it was an expo with like, vendors and events, and there would be grappling tournaments and, like a convention for MMA. And then there was a panel one time. This is in when was it? 11? No. I forget exactly, like maybe before 2011. Yeah, because I think our documentary came out in 2011. So maybe it was like 2010, like 10 years ago. there's a panel of journalists and different people, and Eddie Goldman had made a comment on that panel saying, like, you know, New York is never going to legalize MMA until there's a really solid grassroots movement with a coalition where everybody kind of just joins forces and really pushes for it. Because at that point, it was just essentially UFC lobbyists or whatever, you know, doing whatever in Albany and, you know, not being successful at it. And so he made that comment, and that kind of just lit a spark in my head. And then I started with a letter writing campaign to our assemblymen and stuff. And then you can go back and find the YouTube, like the original YouTube video I put of myself mailing letters to all my representatives and stuff, and encouraging people to do the same. And then I listed where you can find all that out. And that just grew. That became a coalition with lots of people around New York State. And then I started with me and myself and Jim Genia, who's another like noted journalist, and a few other people. We started actually meeting with the assembly people and the senators on a one-on-one basis, and really lobbying for it, you know, pushing for it. And then eventually towards the end, we started working in tandem with the UFC lobbyist as well. And then also in tandem with the lawyers, the UFC lawyers that were waging the constitutional lawsuit against New York. So we got pretty deep involved. And then when we finally got it legalized, I was like, thank God, I'm done with this. I'm out. Let somebody else deal with what has to happen next, you know?
What were some of the like roadblocks or mindsets that were some of these people you were talking with? I mean, what were the barriers to it becoming legal?
There were a lot of barriers, and the barriers were kind of fluid, right? So when it was banned in '97, it was banned, obviously. But New York has the distinction of being the only state that legalized it and then banned it like within like a couple of weeks. Like they had actually legalized it under Governor Pataki. And then Senator McCain came out with, you know, this is human cockfighting, blah, blah, blah. And then it started getting banned. And then, Pataki, a Republican, like McCain, like they were buds, you know, so Pataki bowed to the pressure and reversed it. And they used this little, I think, I don't know what it's called, but there is some procedure to basically undo something that was just passed. You know, like there's a period of time where you could be like, scratch that, you know? So like they basically reversed it and banned it. And then wrote a hasty law to ban it. And then at that time, ironically, that's when I had my first Shudo fight, which was like, you know, an MMA style fight. I had it here in New York that same year that it was banned. It was my first and last fight, MMA style fight. And then, so they wrote this hasty law, and then all the martial arts community was like, but what about us? You know, what about judo? And what about this? And what about that? So the law wrote into the law, like certain sport organizations that were still allowed to do their thing, you know, like World Taekwondo Federation, you know, all this stuff. And then now what's interesting is you fast forward 20 years or whatever, and that law was so hastily written that it didn't say, for example, okay, USA Judo, you can do judo in New York. What it said is you can just operate in New York. They assumed it was judo, but there became a loophole, and this is how amateur MMA came back into New York. So some of these governing bodies that were supposed to just be kickboxing or just be whatever realized that they basically were grandfathered in by the old law, and they could really run any kind of show they wanted. You know what I mean? So they started running amateur MMA, and they couldn't be stopped because it was legal. And that actually came up in the court case. I was there in court when it happened, and it came up, and it was confirmed, like, yeah, they can do that. You know, it's just unregulated by the state. So that became a whole different problem because of the poor regulation on a lot of these amateur shows. But eventually, what was the state's undoing was that they, over the years, had flip-flopped on how they would enforce the law. That was the big that was the weak link in the law in terms of the court case, and then future battles. Like they, sometimes they would enforce the law and crack down on shows, and sometimes they wouldn't, and so basically, I forget the term, constitutional something is a legal term, but it basically means if the average citizen reads the law and can't understand what it means,
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Then the law has to be stricken, and that was reinforced by the fact that the state would, through different administrations, choose to interpret the law differently, right? So there was no one standard interpretation of the law. And so that was what really started the ball rolling and getting the law repealed eventually. It wasn't the lawsuit that did it, but that kind of started bringing up the serious legal issues with that. But in terms of who was lobbying against us, everybody was lobbying against us. The Catholic Church lobbied against us. They actually compared it to pedophilia, if you can believe that. I have the letters that they compared, allowing two men to kind of fight, bread and circuses style or whatever, to pedophilia, bestiality. They compared it to all this crazy shit. But the biggest problem was that the UFC owners, the Fertittas, in the beginning, this wasn't a problem. It became a problem. In the earlier period of time, this was not why it was banned in New York, or why the ban continued in New York, I should say, because it was banned in '97, right? But when you get to the early 2000s and late, the 2000 teens, different problems evolved. So one of the problems was that the Fertittas that owned the UFC were in a very public battle with the hotel trade unions in Vegas, because they owned the station casinos, right? And they were non-union casinos, and they were having a massive battle in Vegas with the unions over unionization of their hotel and casino chains. That battle started getting fought in New York as a proxy battle. So all the unions in New York started supporting the unions in Vegas, and they were doing everything they could to lobby against MMA in New York just to hurt the UFC, because the UFC wasn't the Fertittas weren't unionizing their hotels and casinos. Oh. So when I first got involved in the fight, that was kind of a non-issue. I have statements from lots of our legislators. In fact, the head of the union committee in the assembly and stuff, a lot of them were we haven't seen any, they would say, we haven't seen any resistance from the unions on this. But as the years went by, that became a bigger issue. And it became pretty much the central issue, or at least the public central issue. And I think Dana White made it worse for us by using New York also to fight his battle from Vegas. He would use New York, and he would use New York to slam the unions. And you can't do that in New York. It's a hugely union-friendly state, right? And, basically nobody in Albany liked Dana White, kind of like everybody, right? So they would I'm banned by Dana White. It's awesome. If I go to tweet him, it says, "Oh, you've been banned by Dana White." But
oh man, that's funny.
That happened after I criticized him. I was interviewed on ESPN, and I said on the interview that Dana White needs to just shut up because he's not helping us here in New York, and blah blah blah. The next thing you know, then I didn't know I was banned by him yet, and then I met him. The UFC lobbyist invited me backstage at Radio City Music Hall for the Ronda Rousey Miesha Tate press conference, right? So I was backstage for that. And then I met Dana White, and then I don't think he associated me that he was meeting as me, the guy that's criticizing him all the time on blogs and stuff. And then, but I went to tweet a picture of me and him, say, "Hey, it was great to meet you," whatever. And then I couldn't tweet him because it was "Oh, you've been banned," But over the years, he's unbanned me during times where we were fighting for the legalization, and then rebanned me. He's so childish, I know so many
Wow.
people that have been banned by him. It's like a little club. It's like a badge of honor kind of thing. But make a long story short, we in 2011, the coalition we produced a documentary. Myself and Colleen Poole, who is a filmmaker here in New York, we did a documentary on New York MMA and the history at that point on the ban, which you can see on my Vimeo now for free if people want to check it out.
Okay.
It was on Hulu for like 5 years. We actually got it distributed on Hulu, and then I think Hulu just dropped it after we got MMA. Maybe because nobody was watching it anymore either. But now you can see it for free on my Vimeo, and it's a really great history piece about just MMA in general, and some of the dispels some of the myths, that like the myth that the original UFC had no rules. There definitely were rules. Like the old UFCs had rules. There was a rule book, in fact. I mean, there were minimal rules, but there was definite rules.
Yeah.
But it was the no hold, the 2 men enter, 1 man leaves stuff. That was all just marketing. But so if you want to check that out, but yeah, so by the year that it got legalized, we were meeting with people hardcore, and myself and a few others had actually written plans, like options, like option A, B, and C, like how we feel it should be regulated, so it was a good time. It was a stressful time, but it was a fun time too. Made a lot of good friends. We held rallies, in front of like Governor Cuomo's office and at Madison Square Garden. We did rallies, and we had like great people speaking at our rallies. We had like Frank Shamrock and Overeem and all these people that were speaking at our rallies. Our rally got featured. Overeem had a web series at one point documenting his travels through the fight world, and then his web series covered our rally when he was in New York for Strikeforce. It was cool, man. But we finally got it.
Super interesting. Yeah. How has it been? Post legalization has been a positive thing for the state in terms of tax dollars and everything.
I don't know. I mean, I assume so. I mean, I assume there was some kind of bump. I mean, I remember at the time UFC was saying, "Oh, we're going to have all these shows every year, like 4 or 5 shows a year." When the reality is they'll maybe do 1 a year.
Yeah.
And in New York, or maybe 1 upstate and 1 downstate, something like that. But my contention was always that it's the amateur shows that are actually going to bring in more useful dollars to the state. So UFC once a year comes into, let's say, Madison Square Garden or the Barclays Center in New York City or somewhere upstate, like in Rochester. Like though New York City, we don't need that bump in money. Like the rest of New York, which is much more economically depressed than New York City, is where I think it's more important, So like if you're having like 80 amateur MMA shows a year in New York, and it was about at that one point, I don't know what it is currently, but if you're having like 80 amateur shows in New York State a year in small economically depressed towns where that's the biggest thing. Like we fought in upstate New York in brain farting on the name of the town, but it was way upstate, not far from Rochester. And we fought in the first legal amateur show after that whole thing in the lawsuit came up where I told you where they had to admit that the amateurs were legal, just unregulated by the state. So I brought a couple guys up to fight in it in the very first one. And I mean, this is a little small town upstate New York that brought in like over 2,000 spectators. Like their hotels were full, their restaurants were full, like all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like those shows are much more meaningful to the financial bottom line of the counties around New York State than a UFC in Madison Square Garden. So like my position was always like the regulation and safety aspects of protecting and promoting the amateur ranks is much more important than the big shows, because the big shows have their self-contained safety protocols, like all that kind of stuff. The UFC has it all down pat. They have their road show for when there's no commission. They know what they're doing. You know what I mean? But it's making sure that the amateur circuit is safe and vibrant is the real economic engine for local communities in New York. That was always my perspective. Like I was always caring more about getting the amateurs going and maybe the regional pros, than having the big shows here. Like I didn't really care about that. So how that's been affected since 2016, I don't know. I honestly don't know. But there have been shows. I think there's been a decline actually in the number of shows just based on what I see going on. So I don't know how effective it would be, because I don't think the state actually chose to regulate the amateurs in the proper way. They basically subcontracted out to sanctioning bodies that were already kind of doing a shitty job before. And the state basically didn't want to take on the responsibility of overseeing the amateurs, just the pros, Whereas, like, let's say take New Jersey or some other states, the athletic commission oversees the amateurs, but that's not the case in New York. They field it out to sanctioning bodies that regularly will cut corners and cheat the rules, So I guess it was kind of a status quo in terms of who was running the show. I think a lot of people couldn't afford to get like the licensing, all the financial aspects of getting bonded and the insurance and the licensing stuff that's required. So you probably lost some shows and stuff too. But I still believe that the amateur ranks are where people should focus, not only just for financial reasons, but just for actually building up a sport. That's how you build up a sport. You don't build up a sport by propping up the people like the UFC. You build up a sport by propping up the people who aspire to one day be in the UFC. You know what I mean?
No, that's a great point. And that's kind of the grassroots approach of if you don't have those feeders and those type of mixed shows that you're talking about, where you have or what I think you were hitting on would be like, you got mostly amateur card, but you're going to have 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 regional pros on there, a couple up and comers, and then the local celebrity. Or our state's been interesting. I'm just interested too in the differences in like how state commissions run things and handle things. We were completely unregulated in Arkansas until 2009.
Right.
And then regulation has really increased since. And I think we have 2 shows in the state at this time presently, but there have been a dozen come and go just in the 13 and a half years I've been doing this.
Right. I remember during the interview, when I got interviewed for the commission seat by the lieutenant governor, I kind of knew at that point there was no way I was going to get in, because they're asking all these questions about like safety protocol and what do you see as what are the issues and stuff. And I could tell that all they really cared about was getting that UFC money or whatever, and this is one of the things we talked about was training of officials. Like I talked about how important it is to properly train the officials, and to properly oversee the training of the referees and the judges and all this kind of stuff. And they literally, they ended up not doing this, I imagine, but because I know people that are working as officials now, they have to take the in-person, ABC, Association of Boxing courses and stuff. But at the time during the interview, the lieutenant governor told me they were planning on doing online certification for the referees, like an online class. And I was just like pretty adamant, like that can't happen. Like I was just like, with all due respect, that's not the way. I was like, can you imagine giving people a driver's license online or like anything like that? It's like, no, you have to be in the room and actually train people, And because I've done it multiple times, the Association Boxing Commission's ref course and judges course. And then I served as an official for amateur in New York as a judge. I refereed once, but the judging, and I judged, and I was an event supervisor. So I was like the guy that basically was the bad guy that would tell them if they were not doing things properly. It's like, hey, listen, man, you got to have like, like I remember one of the shows there was like that I was just sitting ringside, but I wasn't officiating or working. I was just invited to sit ringside. And with the journalists, and they had all the cornermen walking from the backstage warm-up areas into the ring, everything with their shoes on, and all tracking in all the dirt and grime. And like by halfway through the fight, when you were sitting ringside, you could see like, you could literally see the layer of dirt on the canvas inside the cage, right? From all the people tracking in and out. And then there were guys that were getting taken down and getting like scraped, like because of the shit in there, you know? So like when I started sanctioning, I was really strict about like no shoes in the mat, bro. Like, you know, I know it sounds like Cobra Kai, right? No shoes on the mat. But I was like, seriously, like, dude, they got really pissed at me one time. I told them, yo, the ring girls cannot wear the high heels on the canvas. They just can't. They can wear them out. They can do their strut all sexy like, but before they go up the stairs into that canvas, the shoes come off. And they got pissed at me. And I'm like, listen, those heels will poke a hole in that. You know, I mean, there's like, and they're tracking in all this dirt, you know, and that's just the minimal problem. There was a case where they had the canvas was brand new. This was not on an event that I worked. This was on a different one, but I know one of the officials. And brand new canvas, and they had the lights, you know, heating up the with painted logos on the canvas, like painted logos, and they had the lights that were heating up. This was on a unregulated amateur show. The lights heating up, you know, they heated up the paint. The paint got so hot on the canvas that dudes were getting burned, like when they got taken down, hitting the hot paint that was sitting under the lights. You know what I mean? It's like, this is all the kind of stuff, or guys getting cut up on the zip ties. You know how they zip tie the pads around the edge? You need to have an inspector go around that shit and make sure that the part that you snip is facing outside the cage. You know what I mean? Not facing into the cage. But there have been cases where that's been done half-assed, and then the sharp snipped off part of the zip tie is facing inward. Guys are up against the cage getting cut or like whatever. You know, things that you don't think of, like before you start the show, do you have the route of egress for the paramedics if they have to take somebody out? You know what I mean? And that has to be kept clear all the way to the ambulance, and the ambulance has to be ready to go. You know, there have been shows where like the paramedics are just sitting in the back. You know, the promoters think they're doing a good job. The paramedics are sitting in the back, and all of a sudden somebody gets hurt, and there's a mob scene that they have to get through, and then a mob scene to get out. You know, and it's like there's all these things that you have to pay attention to as an event supervisor. It's not just checking everybody's tape and hand wraps and gloves and stuff like that. You know, there's tons of other shit.
Yeah, and man, that's a great point too, what you're saying about like not going with an online certification. And USA Boxing, like we have a boxing club, and they've got one of our active boxers in the past to come up and be, and other boxers across the state to spar. Yeah. So the four judges and ref clinics. So basically they can supervise that. You have the ref that's there that's offering the training, the head referee for the state. And that is so imperative that we increase training like that across the board, because I've seen that be a problem in any state I've had people compete in, but I've talked to plenty of other coaches that have made those remarks.
So like I trained a lot under Rob Hines, who is he's one of only 5 guys that authorized to give the training course for the ABC. And he's also on the ABC Rules Committee and Development Committee for MMA, right? And I've trained, that's who I've taken all my courses with. And in his courses, same thing. In fact, a couple of my students volunteered for him to grapple. And part of the whole test is for the judges to know, like, you know, it's always better if a judge is, or a referee, well, more of a judge, but if a judge is actually someone who trains, right? That's always better. But a lot of times they're not, you know, like, because the sad thing is like the ABC makes recommendations, but state commissions don't have to abide by it. You know what I mean? In the end, it's up to a state commission. They could have that old time boxing judge that they just grandfathered up to MMA who doesn't understand like the ground game and stuff. But so what Rob does in his course, and like he sent me a list of 20 different techniques, you know, whatever, omoplata, ankle lock, you know, neck crank, like 20 different things. And then I get 2 of my students They know those 20 things, and they're going to demonstrate them to the students in the class, in the class, and it's a test. Okay, you don't have to know the name. You know, I mean, if you know the name, great. It was like extra credit. But basically, because, you know, like omoplata, it could be shoulder lock, it could be key lock, it could be like, there's all different names for the same techniques. But what he was focused on is they show a move and you write down what's it attacking? What's happening here? You know, like, is it attacking an elbow? Is it attacking a shoulder? Yeah. Is it attacking a wrist or whatever? And then, so he had 20 submissions that the students had to identify. You know what I mean? Like, so, but it's to your point, he had actual people in there doing stuff. You have to have people actually seeing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of states don't. You know, the best, there's like there's good commissions and bad commissions, you know. It's like, you know, it's like what happened with Drysdale in the UFC that just happened. I mean, forget about Drysdale for a minute, but let's just talk about the inspectors. You know, they're in Vegas. There's the Vegas Commission requires 2 inspectors per corner. A lot of states have 1 inspector per corner, right? Mm-hmm. So there's 2 inspectors per corner, and those inspectors, like, you know, everybody's like, oh, well, the inspectors signaled that, you know, when the minute was up and the inspector signaled the referee, you know, that he didn't want to continue. Like, that should have happened like 45 seconds sooner. Like, inspectors are in the corner for a reason. They're supposed to be listening and watching what's going on in the corner. And if you have a fighter that's saying, that's it, I'm out, I don't want to continue, I'm hurt, blah, 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 how do you think the doctor gets there? You know, it's, hey, it's the inspector who is supposed to call over the referee and say, yo, have this guy looked at or whatever. So the fact, I mean, yeah, I think Drysdale was wrong, but I think also there's a problem with the inspectors. Like, why did it take a minute?
9 times he said out loud and verbalized, I don't want to go back out there. 9 times.
And I counted, if you count the times where he just said no, like, there were a lot of times where Drysdale would say something and he'd say no, no, no. If you count the no's and the denials, including the 9 times he said, I don't want to go out there, it was 16 times. 16 times he either denied it, said no, or said, I don't want to go out there. So that's 16 times in 60 seconds. Think about how many times that is. You know what I mean? That's a lot, you know? And so Drysdale aside, where were the inspectors? They're supposed to be paying attention and calling the doctor over, or not the doctor, calling the referee over, because the referee is the sole arbiter, right? The referee is the only person that stops the fight. The doctor might say this fight's over, but who calls it officially? The referee, right? It's always the referee. So the inspectors, after like 10 seconds, probably heard him say, no, I'm done, like 5 times already, you know, and should have been calling the referee over, but they didn't. It all happened at the last minute. And I know Drysdale is saying, like, well, look, I waited till the last minute and I said he's done at the last minute. I really question whether Drysdale, if there wasn't the pressure of all the officials at that point surrounding them, if he would have went that way. You know what I mean? Nobody will ever know. But I think, like I said on my Facebook post, I said, look, for the first 50 seconds, you can try and motivate your guy, you know? But once you hear that seconds out, boom, your job is to protect that guy. You know what I mean? And still pushing him to go out, ignoring all those. It's not like he said, oh, I don't know, coach, I'm not sure. You know, it's like he was adamant. He was adamant for that whole minute that he did not want to go back out, you know? And that's when you have to think about your fighter's well-being at that point. It's not about the win. It's not about your team. It's not about whatever. And especially considering that he took the fight on 5 days' notice. They knew he wasn't prepared. They knew his cardio was for shit. So take that context, you know, and a UFC debut, the pressure of that. And I would want to know with the commission, like, you know, come on, Vegas. You're going to take a guy that what was he, 3 fights? He had 3 fights before this. And the
I
other
think he
guy
might
had
have
like,
been 5-0, maybe is what he
and
was.
the other guy had like 15. The other guy had 15 fights. And this guy had like, maybe this was his 5th fight or something. But to me, that's not an even match for a UFC debut. So you got to ask the commission too. I mean, yes, Drysdale I think was wrong, but there's a whole bunch of other problems of that fight. It's like, why was that fight even made? Why was that match even approved? And then why did you even accept that fight? You know, and then knowing that your guy is outclassed and exhausted from a weight cut on 5 days notice and undertrained, do you still push him out there? You know, like I saw Drysdale's statement and I totally empathize. I've been in the corner with lots of people where I really wanted them to continue, but they didn't want to continue. You know, not a lot of times, most, you know, but on occasion, whether it's in grappling or whatever. I mean, whatever I'm in the corner, I always have to remind myself that it's not about me. It's not about what I want, you know. It's about what that guy wants. In the end, it's about that dude and making sure that that guy, I don't send that guy out when he's not ready to be out, either physically or psychologically ready to be out. But in Drysdale's statement, he starts off his statement by saying, we made a mistake accepting this fight, that we made a tactical error accepting this fight, and a tactical error in thinking that he could win the way he usually does against such a seasoned guy. You know what I mean? So you can't start off a statement saying, we made a mistake probably accepting this fight, and then turn around and say, but it's totally fine to keep pushing him out there. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't say it was a mistake to take the fight, but it's not a mistake to push him out there when the guy's exhausted. If it was a mistake to take the fight, then the fact that you should have called it even reinforced, you know? So look, by all accounts, I've heard Drysdale's an awesome dude. I've never met him. I've seen tons of interviews with him. He's never come across like a dick or an asshole or anything. I just think in that moment for this fight, like, he allowed his own personal desires to take precedent over the reality of the situation. And I think either now or later, sometime in the future, that's just going to have to be something that he looks at, you know?
Yeah. And too, how much of a cultural problem within the fight game do you think that is? Like, I mean, how many towels do we see get thrown in? To Tony Ferguson, I thought, I don't know if you saw that fight, but I could have seen the towel being thrown in on that. Referee stopped it, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, like, you don't see as much of this in boxing, you know, as you do in MMA. And part of it is because boxing has a much longer history and a much more established set of protocols for training for coaches. Like you said, like, if you're in USA Boxing, like, I did my level 1 coaching training in USA Boxing. I never went beyond level 1, but they have like 4 levels that as you progress, as your fighters going from regional, you know, local to regional to national, you have to keep doing these increased levels of training in order to be a coach, in order to even be in the corner of USA Boxing. There's nothing like that exists in MMA, right? In MMA, you pay your $65 for your seconds license with the state commission, and you can go be in the corner. You know, the sport hasn't been around long enough, you know, we should be learning from what the boxing people do, you know? And I can already see the arguments of people saying, I should be able to corner whoever the fuck I want to corner. They shouldn't have to make me do trainings and this and that and the other thing. But the bottom line is, you are, by going into the corner for someone, it's an implied contract. You're going to do your best for me, and I'm going to save your ass. You know, I mean, that's what a second is. A second is the person to save your ass and make sure nothing goes wrong, all the way back from the days of duels where you would bring your second, right? To make sure that there's no foul play going on, to watch your back. That's the whole point of seconds. You know what I mean? It's that concept hasn't made it in a systemic, structural way to MMA yet. Now, for sure, there are tons of coaches who are awesome, who have on their own gone to take the courses and gone to do trainings and gone to do what they need to do and really evolved and understand the role of a coach as, like, not just pit crew, like in a race, you know what I mean? Like in NASCAR or something. You know, but there are also coaches that don't, and that just from amateurs all the way up through pro, never really learned how to coach, never really learned how to teach, never really learned, you know, the role of the person in there, you know. So I just tell people, look at boxing. Boxing makes sure that everybody gets a basic level of training before they can go into the corner, you know. And, you know, they don't require that obviously in the pros, but every pro coach started as an amateur coach. And it's assumed that if you've gone through USA Boxing and you got to like a level 4 coach, that you've had significant amount of fights and significant amount of trainings under your belt. And you at least understand the basic code of ethics and basic responsibilities of somebody in the corner. Because you literally are there taking, you're literally saying to someone, if you're not able to save your life, I'm going to save your life. That's what you're saying. Like if you're not capable of thinking straight, if you're not capable of defending yourself, I'm going to speak for you and I'm going to defend you. That's the job of the second. You know what I mean? And I don't remember who he was going to duel with, but there's a story of Abraham Lincoln was going to duel with a guy on a sandbar. And he trained with his second was a guy from West Point, trained him for a saber duel. Right.
And the seconds are who talked Abraham Lincoln and the other guy out there like, guys, do we really want to do this? This guy might be president someday. Come on. And like just very last minute, the seconds saved both of those guys. I mean, yeah.
That's their, like I said, that's the job of the second from as long as there have been duels. And that's what MMA is, right? It's a duel between two guys and you've got your seconds. You know?
Two guys go in, one guy comes out.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, so hey man, last thing I wanted to chat with you about, I almost forgot. It's something super interesting I think that you've gotten into over the years. I don't know how long you've been doing it, but choreography.
Oh,
like
yeah.
I've seen you putting together some amazing sequences and just putting out videos just on your Facebook page over the years. Like, when did you start doing that? What got you interested in doing that?
So the stunt stuff started for me, like, I would officially in like 2014, I started seriously thinking about that as a career profession option. Filmmaking and stuff, I've always been interested, even as a kid. And then, you know, like through martial arts, I had gotten involved in TV and stuff as a technical advisor, and like probably starting around like 07, like with the Human Weapon on Travel Channel.
Yeah.
And then I worked on that show, and then I worked on Dahani Tackles the Globe on, no, Human Weapon was on History Channel. Then I did Dahani Tackles the Globe on Travel Channel, and I started producing some documentaries, like the MMA documentary and different things. I helped my friend Matt Kaplowitz, the fight nerd, like produce a documentary of his on female Muay Thai fighters, which you should check out. It's on Amazon. It's called what do you call it? Muay Thai. Oh, it's called Girl Fight: A Muay Thai Story.
Yeah. I'm aware. I haven't seen it though.
Yeah, it's really good. So definitely check it out. And then so in 2014, I produced a short film for a student of mine who was used to fight for me, and then he what do you call it? He went to LA. He went to film school here in New York, and then he went to LA, and then he got involved in television out there. But then he was writing a pitch for a TV show, and I had just come off of successfully producing this documentary and getting it distributed on Hulu, which honestly was pure chance. Like I had no idea what I was doing back then, but I was lucky. You know, it's not often your first film you get distributed, you know, that's very rare. But anyway, he hit me up one time and he was like, hey, you're a big time producer now. Do you want to produce my short film? And I was like, yeah, sure. So that was with Choke Artist. And I produced it. It was called Choke Artist. It was a 10-minute pitch for a greater TV series. And we raised like $8,000 and shot it. And then we had Al Iaquinta from the UFC starring in it. And because I've known Al since he's like 16 or 17. I used to teach out in Long Island. I've known him like for a long time. And then he hit me up when he heard that we were casting for that. So he was like, "Oh, can I take a shot at it?" You know, and he was actually really good in it. And then so we produced it, and then because Al was in it, and I choreographed a fight for that short, right? So that was like my first kind of official fight choreography. I had done one prior in like 2010 for a music video, like a non-union music video that it came out pretty bad. It was like really bad, but it was my first attempt, right? So then we shot this short, and Al was in it, and we got contacted by Darren Aronofsky's office. You know, actually before that, because Al was in it and he was talking about it at post-fight press conferences for UFC and stuff, Fox Sports called us, and then we gave them exclusivity. They did a whole story on our show, and they aired our short on Fox Sports website. Like we gave them exclusivity to air it. And then because of that, people over at Darren Aronofsky's office saw it, and he was considering doing a TV series, like a first TV series. He's thinking about doing an MMA one, because the backdrop of ours was that it was still illegal in New York. It was about underground fighting and stuff in New York. And then so they saw the show. You know, we had several meetings there. They ended up not doing the show for different reasons, but the outcome of it was that I met the stunt coordinator for Aronofsky, and he said, you know, you should really consider stunts as a possibility, you know, and you know, and then I did because of the fight. Like, people really liked the fight that I choreographed for that short. And then that was in 2014. I did, you know, so then, like everybody trying to get into the industry, it's just doing a lot of work and hustling and non-union stuff. And then I finally got into Screen Actors Guild at the end of 2016. And my first union job was, I think, Blacklist in like January 2017. So, or January, February 2017. And then the rest is history, man. But the fight stuff, to be honest with you, like, everybody gets into the industry for some skill that they have, you know, that most people don't have. Like, so Sambo, for me, Sambo is like it's good timing, like with Russians being bad guys and stuff. And I'm a Sambo guy, and that's how I got to work on the John Wick movies, was because of Sambo, right? So it was just like good timing. Like I worked for, I didn't really work on Wick 2, but I did work with them for like a couple of days, showing them, I wasn't union yet, but they brought me in as sort of like a advisor kind of thing, just to show them some fancy throws and stuff like that. And then I got to meet the stunt team and the stunt coordinator, JJ Perry. And then I got to meet Chad Stahelski, the director, you know, the guy, one of the co-founders of 8711. And then, you know, he kind of started supporting me a little bit. And then and JJ Perry was great. Like, even after the one day that I came in to show them stuff, they just invited me to come back to rehearsals and just watch how they do things. And so I got like a little internship. And then by the time John Wick 3 came along, I was union, or now, you know what I mean? And then Chad hit me up again, and then he was like, "Hey, you want to work on 3? We're going to do this big Sambo scene, and we're going to reveal that Wick is this Sambo guy." And like, so I was really involved in the development of that scene, like from everything from wardrobe to casting to being in it, and then to in the scene, that Sambo scene in John Wick 3, like, I was sort of telling the guys what to do, like the grappling and stuff. Like, the two guys in the middle of the Collier brothers in judo, which are awesome. If you follow them on Instagram, the Collier brothers, they're great. They're two young kids from Kentucky, I think, but really good judo kids. So they were brought up to do the throws and stuff. And then there was guys grappling on the sides. And I was basically Chad told the Collier brothers, just pick 6 really badass throws and just keep doing them over and over. And then the two pairs of guys grappling on the sides, I was choreographing what they were doing. I basically gave them 4 move sequences that would start and end with the same move, so they could just kind of do it in a loop. And because we knew the scene was going to be a fast one, they didn't have to be protracted grappling, but what was more important was that they stayed in their lane and they didn't go off the mats and like roll into Angelica Houston or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's like, I literally told the kids, I said, listen, Angelica Houston's going to be standing right here while you guys are grappling. You have to pretend there's like a force field here. You cannot move past this. If you do a rolling armbar and land on Angelica Houston, I'll never work again and I'll never hire you again. And the funny thing was, is like, they're so young, they don't know who Angelica Houston is. You know what I mean? It's like, they're like, oh wait, wasn't she in Addams Family? I'm like, oh my God, you know.
Lonesome Dove.
Yeah.
You seen that movie when I was a kid?
Of course.
That was the movie that she was in that was famous for me.
But to the point with the fight choreography, like you get in for a reason, but then every other job after that, I mean, how many Sambo movies are there going to be? You know what I mean? So then starts the process of actually becoming a stunt performer proper, like learning all the other stuff that you need to learn. You know what I mean? Like everybody gets in for something, like maybe you're a pro BMX guy, pro skateboarder, pro whatever. And then it comes time to learning everything else. Like fighting for the screen is very different than fighting for real. So there's a whole re-education that has to happen. And, you know, it was years before I got asked to do my first fight ever. You know, it's like, just because you have a skill in the non-film world doesn't mean it's going to translate immediately. So there's a lot of work that goes on, and all the stuff that you see us putting up, and there's a lot of stuff we don't put up because we think it looks like poop. You know what I mean? But it's like anything else. You have to just keep shooting. Like one of the things that Chad told me when I first interviewed it with him for John Wick II, and he was like, listen, you have to shoot. If you really want to be in this business, you have to treat it like anything else. Like you have to shoot fights all the time. Just keep shooting them. And it's not just about the choreography. It's about knowing the camera angles and what kind of lenses help sell different kinds of techniques and like how to edit. He told me you have to know how to edit. You have to learn how to edit. Like, because the guys that are in fight scenes that understand what's going on after the fight scene's over, or how the camera operator is looking at the fight scene and how the editor might be looking at it, that's going to make you a much better choreographer for film, right? It's not just about coming up with a bunch of cool moves. And then the other thing is like, you have to understand that the story is more important than the fight, right? The fight is just a vehicle to help tell the story. So like, you know, like, oh, so you've got some fry chef and all of a sudden he knows Kung Fu. Like that doesn't make sense. Like the fights have to match the characters, you know? So a big part of coming up with fights is not about the coolest shit you can come up with. It's about, you read the script and what kind of fight makes sense for these people, you know, and then how you're going to shoot it. So it's important to just constantly shoot. So a lot of the stuff you see is just our practice fights. You know, before we got shut down, we would shoot a practice fight every single week, like every week, like and then each week a different guy from our crew will film it and edit it. So everybody has to film and edit. And then we come up with the choreography on the fly, you know, and we might give a little character bio just to kind of help us design the choreography specific to that person. And, you know, we've come up with kind of a method of how we do it every week, and it's been really helpful. And then another tool that we do is one person will pick a location somewhere in the city and not tell the other people until the day before where the location is. We call it like 3-hour fight challenge. So then the day before we'll be like, okay, everybody meet at Central Park under the Stone Bridge, like whatever. And then you have 3 hours to choreograph and shoot a fight on the fly at that location, like based on where you didn't know you were going to be. And then we usually give like, somebody's going to edit it. We'll give them like a week to do post-production, drop in sound or edit or do whatever. And like I said, sometimes they look like crap and sometimes they look really good, but it's not about putting it out there. It's more about just training, you know? Yeah. So Ray Donovan was the first show that I had a little bit of fight work I was able to contribute, which was cool. But up until that point, I hadn't done a single fight, you know?
Man, that is super interesting. And you have had an amazing life story for what you said, you're 52 earlier?
I'll be 52 in August. Yeah.
51.
I was born in 68. There you go. That's what
There
got
you
me.
go.
That's what got
All
me
right.
listening to your podcasts, man.
Yeah, man, I got to check out that. Was that a documentary or that you sent me earlier?
No, Defy Bloods by Spike Lee. It's on Netflix.
Okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
I
it's
googled
good.
it when you sent it to me because I hadn't heard about it at all, and I saw that it was on Netflix, and I was like, oh, well,
Yeah,
I'll be able to watch it. Yeah, I'll check it out. That's
it's good. I mean, it's not like it's not like a historical fiction or anything, but it definitely, I don't want to give it away, but it starts in 1968 Vietnam, you know,
all right. Yeah.
so
Okay.
it's pretty cool.
We're doing 3 more episodes I had planned on that series. One we're gonna do for the battle for Wei.
Hmm.
I'm doing that with a former professor of mine who's actually going to be our first jiu-jitsu black belt that we promote from our school.
Oh,
He's been
cool.
training with me forever. And he teaches a class on espionage and spies. I had him for, but he also
Nice.
teaches Vietnam War. So he's coming on. And then a girl that I had, she came on to talk about massive resistance. I think I might have sent you Marie. She's going to come on, and we're all going to do one on the 68 election.
Hmm.
And then we have one planned on counterculture. So at least 3
Yeah,
more on that series, if not more.
that's cool, man. I'm definitely looking forward to it. I got to listen to the second one. I listened to the first one. I got to listen to the next one. But it was a
Yeah.
crazy year, man. I mean, I was one of those kids, like at that time, I guess a lot of people were saying like what they're saying now, like, how could you have a kid now? It's the worst time ever, blah, blah, blah. Like, why would you bring a kid into this world? Well, hey, I was brought into the world in 1968. I mean, wars, assassinations, like all this crazy stuff going on. And like, I didn't know anything about the Pueblo incident, like until I listened to your podcast. And now I'm so like addicted to reading about it. Like, I can't believe I never heard of that, to be honest. And
Mitch,
I remember in college, I took this history class with this pretty progressive history professor, the history of the 60s. And we didn't cover that as far as I know. And I was like, wow. I mean, we covered I remember talking about Gulf of Tonkin and a lot of that kind of stuff, but I don't remember ever reading about or hearing about the Puebla incident, which would make an amazing movie, by the way. Like, I
yeah.
can't believe that a movie hasn't been made about that.
Yeah. Well,
So
so
awesome.
how I got plugged into it, and there's if you've been looking around, but Mitch Lerner, he was on my podcast. Jeff Woods, the guy who's going to do the Way episode, trains with me. He's like, hey, check out this guy, because I was talking to him about resources for 68, and he's like, oh, I just so happen to know a guy who's an expert on this very first thing that kind of went down in 68. And Mitch came on the podcast. We didn't talk about that a ton, but it was funny. I told Stephen Kesting about that on our podcast. He listened to
Yeah.
Mitch on the podcast, and he was like, hey, I need that guy's contact info. I want him to come on my podcast. So I was like, great idea. Let me know when the episode drops.
Oh, that's cool.
So,
Yeah, Stefan, for people paying attention to the COVID stuff, like Stefan's on top of that. He's on
yeah.
top of the science on that hardcore.
Which has made him widely unpopular, he said, sadly. Like, he said he has actually got a death threat for suggesting that it's,
Yeah.
you know.
It's unbelievable. Like, when a public health threat becomes so politicized, you know what I mean? And I don't know. We could talk for days on it. I'm not surprised though, and it's very unfortunate because he puts up really great stuff. And the bottom line, but here's the problem: he puts up a lot of really great, legit science. You know what I mean? And we live in a country that 25% of the people think that the sun revolves around Earth. And these are the same people that were asking to understand basic science. It's a big hurdle. It's a big hurdle, man. Like basic statistics, basic numbers, just real basic shit. And I empathize, man. I might be lost if I didn't have to take research design and stats and stuff in grad school and whatever. But and I'm not trying to sound like judgmental and saying like, oh, everybody in this country is stupid, man. I'm just saying it's just a fact that not everybody is capable of understanding that stuff. you know, and then so that's where the confirmation bias and all this other stuff comes into play. And then couple that with politics and everything else. I mean, I highly doubt that in 1918, everybody was running around saying, man, this mask is so un-American, you know, blah, blah. It's like, dude, you know, or like when people say, this is just a flu, I'm like, you haven't experienced the flu when there was no treatment for the flu and no vaccine for the flu. 1918 was a flu and it was fucking bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like comparing it to a flu when your only experience of a flu is a treatable vaccinated disease makes no sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay, so what got Stephen interested in having Mitch Lerner on his podcast was this, and this blew my mind too. Mitch was like, did you know there was an anti-mask league in 1918 that formed because people did? And I was like, what?
Oh, wow. I'm sure there was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't, but it's like he was drawing the parallels from the Spanish flu incident to now. And just saying, hey, that guy's written a ton of articles since, because he's an academic that's been at home.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when I was in college in the 80s and AIDS was a thing. AIDS was new, right? And I remember the people back then saying, you can't make me wear a condom, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm like, dude, okay, I get it, you know? Like, most of us are like, shit, I'm wearing a fucking condom. You know what I mean? But there was that group of people, there was that subset of people that was like, you can't tell me what to do. I'll go condomless, like, whatever. I'm like, yeah, you know what? We can't make you wear a condom, but if there's always... Dude, there's people that rebelled against seatbelts, you know, in cars when they first put seatbelts in cars. There's always going to be people that symbolize that take that small thing and make it a symbol of some other unrelated greater thing. Like, honestly, like, you know, at my wife's store, there was a customer that, you know, they asked, can you put your mask on before you come into the store? And her reply was, well, I guess you want to lose a customer, you know? And then I think her boss said something like, no, I don't want to lose a customer either by you not shopping with us or by you dying or somebody else dying or like whatever, you know? But seriously, like, how does that mask interrupt your shopping experience? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, just be logical about it, man. It has no effect. Or like the people complaining about, oh, we got to wear a mask in a movie theater. Like, how does that mask interrupt your ability to watch a movie? You know, like, it's just really simple stuff. But the mask has become the symbol of these greater political battles going on right now. And that's why you'll never win, you know, when you politicize health. It's unfortunate. Yeah. I mean, look in New York now. Now it's flipped, right? New York, like we talked about in the beginning, New York is now New York, New Jersey, Connecticut. They're doing travel restrictions. I'm curious to see how that goes out, because I remember in the beginning when states were restricting us to come from there, the governor was like, "Well, that's not cool," you know. But now it's like, you know, flipped.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Our governor's, I call him Uncle Asa Hutchinson, man. Which like I think it's been about 2.5 weeks now, but they didn't say anything about martial arts. And then he made mention, probably because I know a bunch of school owners that had been writing letters and sending emails and calling his office. So because they just didn't address. And then too, it's weird, like in our community, like the town that I'm in, Russellville, northwest corner of the state, they're like,
I love Northwest Arkansas.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I've been there a bunch of times. My buddy Tim Kuth is the chief of police in Lowell, Arkansas. And he owns a judo dojo there, which he actually is closed right now, and he'll just reopen when this thing is all over. But it's not his primary income. But Tim and I go way back, and I've been down to Lowell and in Northwest Arkansas a bunch of times. I love it down there, man. The hiking and stuff is amazing.
Oh, yeah. We went and hiked over just across from the Northwest Arkansas, Bella Vista, right there at the Missouri border. We went and hiked up there with some friends of ours because one of my coaches has multiple locations up there. So it's beautiful.
It's
beautiful
gorgeous
part of the state.
But anyway, you were saying like Yeah.
What were we saying?
I forgot. No, yeah, go ahead.
Arkansas being shut down, right? So they were like, hey, you guys can open back in this limited capacity, but don't use the showers. No pub, and I think it was no public restrooms, and then it was they can use the restrooms, but no showers. But meanwhile, we have an aquatic center here, which is like a public pool and stuff, and they were open.
That's
right?
crazy. Yeah.
I'm like, what? I mean, I'm just like, I'm not advocating for like, oh, hey, I need my people to use the showers as much so as just like, you should probably close the city pool down. It just didn't make any sense of like, and that sort of stuff's going on. Man, some of the mayors are not, well, they've been given some, slack to like, okay, you can do things a little bit in your own communities on case by case basis. And I think we're seeing some of the effects of that. So,
well, and that's the thing. It's like New York right now, where I think we're the lowest in the country. Like there are states that have lower infection rate, but like states like Hawaii or like that have never really been affected too badly. But like for New York, we're down at like 1% infection rate, and that's a switch from like some neighborhoods in New York City where at like 51% infection rate, Yeah. So it's like, we're at super low, but for my money, as long as you see what's going on around in the rest of the country, I'm willing to wait a little bit, and see how this plays out. Like I understand the financial stresses on people in, they want to get back to training and stuff. And, it's not like I don't, I definitely do. And, but I'm willing to take it slowly and ease my way back in with phase training and distance training. I just want to see how it plays out, because until everybody is on the decline, then I'll feel a little more confident. But when you've got like some states on the massive inclines that are going on right now, it's not, we have New Yorkers traveling to and from places and stuff. They could bring it back. And basically New York City has entered a fuck you mode. Like nobody's wearing masks. Nobody's giving a shit anymore, and so it doesn't bring a lot of confidence. You know what I mean? So I'm willing to wait and see how it plays out before, I think it's fine to take a little bit of time.
Yeah. Agreed. I'll tell you a great episode on Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't know if you listen to that, but he just had Brett Weinstein. I don't know how you pronounce his last name, but they talked about squashing the curve and like strategies that have worked. I mean, it was a really great, informative talk about everything going on right now. So,
yeah.
But anyway, man. Well, hey,
all my love and support to every gym owner out there, because I know a bunch in New York that have closed for good, and it's like really heartbreaking, man.
I heard 100,000 businesses permanently closed in your state.
Dude, just walking around my neighborhood, seeing all the vacancy signs and stores and stuff and for rent signs, it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we all rebound from this. I know like we're fine right now, barring any second waves or anything crazy, we'll continue.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah. Well, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. It's been awesome talking with you today, man. And
yeah, you too. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, same. Well, man, you have a great evening. I'm about to walk over here and teach some no-gi grappling. So
have fun.
We'll see you later, man.
Take it easy. All right, later, dude. Bye.